Do you think the whole abolish ICE thing is over the top? You may want to sit down. A bombshell report dropped today from the Georgetown Center for Privacy and Tech. The results of its 2-year study on ICE surveillance are horrifying. They found that ICE has created a covert and extensive surveillance system that is being used on basically all Americans. They're using facial recognition technology to scan our driver's license photos. They've hired CIA-funded software firms to mine more of our data and routinely go to data brokers like Equifax to buy our information in bulk. Have you moved recently or driven on the roads or changed utilities? ICE has your information, and they didn't need a warrant.
What she's describing in this video should horrify you, and many people aren't talking about it. In part because it's really hard to understand. It's massive and opaque. The surveillance apparatus in this country is really clandestine, but it's a dragnet in catching everyone's information. That violates your privacy, and a lot of people don't realize that. We'll get into that a little bit more later, but first let's talk about what specifically she's talking about. This report, put out by researchers at Georgetown University, found that ICE has been engaging in mass data collection and surveillance of millions of Americans without a warrant. And some of the info that they put out in there was horrifying. ICE has scanned driver's license photos of 1 in 3 Americans. ICE has the driver's license data of 3 in 4 adults. And ICE also tracks people while they're driving in cities home to 3 in 4 adults. And because they collect so many utility records, you know, your internet, your electricity, your water bill, they collect all of that. They could locate 3 in 4 US adults. And you might think, why does ICE have this information? Isn't ICE the immigration authority? And there was a lot of pushback about ICE's behavior during the Trump years, and for good reason. They were basically Trump's jackbooted thugs, his brown shirts, if you will, rounding up and deporting people who were undocumented. They engaged in really horrific treatment of immigrants. So they got a little pushback for that, and there were calls to abolish ICE, but those dissipated once Trump left office. But beyond the immigration role, they also have a key part in the national security state. And part of that is big data aggregation. And because Congress lags behind technological advancements, we don't have proper understanding or regulations around what government agencies or even corporations can do in that field.
And before you say, well, they're only digging through our information to get to the bad guys, they're tracking all of us. It's so bad that the people organizing the study were shocked by the scale of the surveillance and by the fact that most lawmakers have no idea. ICE goes around laws that attempt to rein them in. ICE has spent almost $400 million building its interception capabilities and then hidden those expenditures by calling them something else, like, I kid you not, office furniture. Did you know there has never been a congressional hearing on ICE surveillance? That needs to change.
But because of something called the third-party doctrine, the government also doesn't have to have a warrant when it buys personal data from companies. And that's how they're doing this. They're rounding up all of this data from big data aggregators, which you might have heard of, and then they're synthesizing it and using it to find immigrants. And that should horrify you, even if you're not an immigrant. That violates your privacy. The government should have a warrant to access your personal information. So there's a good argument that we need to address this third-party doctrine, but that's something Congress and the Supreme Court just doesn't seem focused on, or even willing to do for that matter. And all national security agencies do that. That's part of what Edward Snowden tried to highlight when he leaked documents in 2013. But when they get all this data, how do they synthesize it? And there's something I want to tell you about. It's a company called Palantir. You might know of it. It's started by Peter Thiel. You might know him as the billionaire who was cozy with Trump, spoke at the RNC, or even sued to kill Gawker. You know, he is everywhere in Silicon Valley. He's a massive investor, and he started this company in the early 2000s. And they're known for being able to aggregate and synthesize and distill massive quantities of data. They've been working very closely with ICE to help do the same thing for ICE's data. So as ICE was using all of this data over the past several years to round up immigrants and deport them, Palantir played a key role in that. But this went largely unnoticed, in part because the CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp, was outwardly facing a liberal. He would criticize Trump, and he even said this specifically.
Karp's politics differ, but he says that Palantir remains fully committed to aiding the U.S. government.
I've never stopped being critical of this administration. I'm not planning to vote for this administration. So there are things I do differently. The core issue, though, is who decides. The small island in Silicon Valley that would love to decide what you eat, how you eat, and monetize all your data should not decide who lives in your country and on what your conditions.
Silicon Valley and companies there shouldn't decide who lives in the country? I mean, that's literally what he's doing. He's taking tons of money from ICE to help them deport people. That's exactly what he's doing. Internally, they faced backlash at their company for working with ICE, but they doubled down. I mean, they probably don't care because some of their original funding came from the CIA. But this is all extremely dangerous, and it violates your privacy, and we shouldn't have this. So I hope we can renew these calls to abolish ICE, even though it's not a liberal hot-button topic right now. I mean, this is something we should all be concerned about. Surveillance affects everybody. You have a right to privacy, or you should. The government shouldn't be able to spy on you without a warrant. And people might think, oh, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, why are you worried about it? That's not the case. You should be able to live a private life if you want to. It's your right. And a lot of people might be saying, oh, well, I'm not an immigrant. I don't need to worry about that. But the thing is, they're using this as an entry point into society. They're using it because undocumented people are marginalized and don't have enough people in power looking out for them. And they know if they can get away with this type of behavior when they're targeting immigrants, it's going to be a lot more socially acceptable when they broaden their horizons. So it's time to stand up and fight on behalf of undocumented people and renew the calls to abolish ICE.